The morning air is cold, not the sharp cold of winter, but the heavy, quiet cold of a day that carries bad news. In the streets of London, people begin to gather long before the sun fully rises. Cloaks are pulled tight. Boots scrape softly against damp stones. No one laughs. No one speaks loudly. They whisper. Because today something terrible is about to happen. Word has spread across the city like smoke drifting through narrow streets. The Queen will die today. No official bells ring to announce it. No royal messenger shouts the news in the markets, but everyone knows. And so they come, bakers, merchants, servants, soldiers, curious strangers. They stand quietly outside the ancient walls of the Tower of London, the fortress that has watched centuries of kings rise and fall. Inside those walls, a woman waits. She is not screaming, she is not begging. She is not trying to escape. Instead, she kneels beside a small wooden chair in a quiet chamber lit by a single candle. The flame trembles softly in the still air, bending each time a cold breeze slips through the stone window. Her hands are folded, her lips move in silent prayer. This woman who now waits for death once held the heart of a king. Her name is Anne Boleyn. Only 3 years earlier, she had been the most powerful woman in England, a queen. Not born into royalty, but raised to it by ambition, intelligence, and a love story that would change an entire kingdom. But love in royal courts is rarely simple, and power is never safe. To understand how Anne Boleyn arrived here, inside a prison where queens rarely leave alive, we must go back several years. Back to a time when her name was spoken very differently, not with whispers but with fascination, and sometimes with fear. When Anne first appeared at the royal court of England, she was not like the other women who surrounded the king. Most noblewomen were quiet, careful, trained to smile politely and speak only when spoken to. Anne was different. She had spent years abroad in the elegant courts of Europe, places where fashion, poetry, and clever conversation were prized almost as much as noble blood. She returned to England with confidence, with wit, with a sharp mind that made powerful men listen. Some admired her, others distrusted her, but everyone noticed her, especially one man, the king himself. Henry VII was not yet the aging, angry ruler that history often remembers. At this time he was still strong, charismatic, a king who loved music, hunting, dancing, and grand displays of power. He already had a queen, Catherine of Aragon, but their marriage had grown heavy with disappointment. For years, Catherine had tried to give Henry something he desperately wanted, a son, a prince who would secure the future of the Tudor dynasty, but the sons never survived. Only one child lived, a daughter. And for a king who believed his legacy depended on a male heir, that daughter was not enough. So when Anne Boleyn appeared at court, something unexpected happened. Henry became fascinated. At first it was curiosity, then admiration, then something deeper and more dangerous. But Anne refused to play the role many women had before her. She would not become the king's mistress. She would not be another secret romance hidden behind palace walls. If Henry wanted her, he would have to marry her. And for a king already married, that demand was not just bold, it was explosive. Years passed in a slow, painful struggle. Henry begged the Pope to end his marriage to Catherine. The Pope refused. And in that refusal, history took a sudden turn, because Henry decided something radical. If the church would not give him permission, he would take it anyway. England broke away from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. A decision that shocked Europe. A decision that reshaped the religion of an entire nation, all for one woman, Anne Boleyn. In 1533, she finally became queen, crowned with golden ceremony and watched by thousands of hopeful faces. For a moment, it seemed like a fairy tale with a powerful ending. The clever young woman who captured the heart of a king and rose higher than anyone believed possible. But fairy tales do not live long inside royal courts. Behind smiles and celebrations, resentment was growing. Many nobles hated Anne. Some believed she had destroyed England's old religion. Others believed she had manipulated the king. And many still remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon, the former queen, the queen they believed had been wronged. Enemies began to watch Anne carefully, waiting, watching for mistakes. And in the dangerous world of Tudor politics, mistakes were often deadly. Then something happened that changed everything. Anne failed to give Henry what he wanted most. A son, pregnancy came, hope rose. But each time, hope ended in tragedy. Miscarriages, loss, and with every loss, the king's patience grew thinner. The same love that had once driven him to break an entire church began to fade. Slowly, quietly, dangerously. Soon the whispers returned. Not whispers of romance, but whispers of betrayal, of secret meetings, of forbidden relationships. Rumors that spread through the court like poison, and in royal courts, rumors rarely stay harmless for long. Some believed Anne had grown careless. Others believed something darker, that powerful men were quietly building a case against her, that her fall was not an accident, but a plans. And now in the silent chamber inside the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn kneels alone. A candle flickers beside her. Outside, the city waits. Inside, history holds its breath. Because the question that still echoes across centuries has never truly been answered. Was Anne Boleyn guilty of terrible betrayal, or was she simply a queen who had become inconvenient, a woman who once changed a kingdom, now waiting for a fate that may have been decided long before she ever entered this prison? And if that is true, then Anne Boleyn's execution was not justice. It was something far more tragic. It was inevitable. A court is a place of music, silk, and smiling faces, but beneath the gold and velvet it is also a battlefield. Every glance means something, every whisper carries weight, and every rising star creates new enemies. When Anne Boleyn first arrived at the royal court of England, few people could have guessed how powerful she would become. She was not born a princess. She was not the daughter of a great dynasty. But she had something just as powerful in the dangerous world of kings and queens. She had presence. Anne had spent years abroad in the elegant courts of Europe. In the refined palaces of France and the Netherlands, she learned how power truly worked. Not only through titles, but through intelligence, conversation, charm, and observation. She watched carefully, she listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, people noticed. At the English court, most women followed the same quiet pattern. They curtsied, smiled politely, and stayed far away from politics. Anne did not. She debated ideas, she spoke with confidence, she laughed easily. And she carried herself like someone who already belonged among kings. For some, this confidence was refreshing. For others, it was dangerous. Because a woman who understood power could change the balance of an entire court. And before long, the most powerful man in the kingdom began to notice her, Henry VIII. At first, the king admired her from a distance. Anne was clever, fashionable, and full of life. She danced with elegance and spoke with wit that few could match, but admiration soon became fascination. Henry sent her gifts, letters filled with praise, small tokens of affection. In most cases, a woman at court would have accepted the king's attention quietly. That was how royal affairs usually worked. But Anne refused. She would not be the king's mistress. She would not be a secret hidden behind palace doors. If Henry wanted her, there was only one path forward. Marriage. It was an impossible request. Because Henry already had a queen, Catherine of Aragon had been married to Henry for many years. She was respected across Europe and deeply loved by the English people. But their marriage carried one painful failure: no surviving son. For Henry, this was more than disappointment, it was fear. Without a male heir, the future of the Tudor dynasty felt uncertain, and so his fascination with Anne grew stronger. Anne represented hope, a new beginning, a chance for the son he desperately wanted. Henry became determined to marry her. But ending a royal marriage was not simple. The king turned to the Pope, asking for permission to annul his marriage to Catherine. The answer was no, again and again no. For 7 long years, the question hung over England like a storm cloud. Courts argued, priests debated, diplomats traveled across Europe, all while Henry's obsession with Anne continued to grow. Finally, the king made a decision that shocked the entire continent. If the Pope would not grant the annulment, then England would no longer answer to the Pope. The kingdom broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. A new religious order was created, the Church of England. It was one of the most dramatic decisions in English history, and at the center of it all stood Anne Boleyn. In 1533, she finally received the crown. The coronation was magnificent. Processions filled the streets of London. Bells rang across the city. Crowds gathered to witness the rise of a new queen. Anne rode through the streets wearing gold and jewels, her dark hair hidden beneath a crown that symbolized the king's devotion. For a brief moment, it seemed as if she had won everything: love, power, a place beside the king himself. But the victory came with a cost. Many people never accepted her as queen. Some believed the marriage was sinful. Others remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon. To them, Anne was not a queen, she was an intruder, and the court slowly filled with quiet resentment. Every move Anne made was watched, every word was judged. Powerful nobles whispered behind closed doors. Priests spoke carefully about the kingdom's new religion, and enemies waited patiently for the moment when the king's favor might begin to fade. At first, Henry's love protected her. But royal love could be fragile. Anne soon became pregnant. The kingdom held its breath. If the child were a son, Anne's position would be secure forever. But the baby born in 1533 was not a boy, it was a girl. Her name was Elizabeth I. Henry celebrated politely. But deep inside, disappointment began to grow. More pregnancies followed. And each time, tragedy followed close behind: miscarriages, loss, hope rising, only to collapse again. With every loss, the king's patience grew thinner, and something in his heart began to change. The passion that once drove him to challenge the Pope slowly cooled. In its place came frustration, doubt, and dangerous curiosity about other women at court. Anne noticed it. How could she not? The smiles became less frequent, the warmth in Henry's voice faded, The private conversations grew shorter. Around them, the court sensed the change as well. And that was when the whispers began. Small rumors at first, soft enough to ignore, but rumors have a strange power inside royal courts. They grow, they travel, they evolve. Soon people were speaking of secret meetings, suspicious glances, moments that seemed innocent but could easily be twisted into something darker. Anne Boleyn had once been the woman who reshaped England. But now, slowly and quietly, the ground beneath her feet was beginning to crack. Because in the court of Henry VIII, love could lift a person higher than anyone imagined. But once that love disappeared, the fall could be devastating, and the enemies waiting in the shadows were about to make their move. Spring arrived quietly in the year 1536. Flowers began to open across the fields of England. The air grew warmer. Birds returned to the trees surrounding the royal palaces. From the outside, the kingdom seemed calm, but inside the court of Henry VIII, something darker was unfolding. Slowly, silently. And for Anne Boleyn, the danger was already closing in. The change began almost without warning. Only a few months earlier, Anne had still been queen. She still walked through the palace halls wearing royal silk and jewels. Servants bowed as she passed. But by the spring of 1530, more importantly, Cromwell understood something dangerous. Henry's interest in Anne was fading, and the king's attention had begun to drift toward another woman, Jane Seymour. Jane was very different from Anne, quiet, gentle, careful with her words. Where Anne had once dazzled the court with bold confidence, Jane appeared calm and obedient, exactly the kind of queen many nobles preferred. For Cromwell, the solution to England's political tensions suddenly seemed clear. Remove Anne, allow the king to marry again, restore stability to the court. But removing a queen was not simple. It required something powerful, something shocking. Something that would destroy her reputation completely. And so the accusations began. In April 1536, several men at court were suddenly arrested. One of them was a musician who worked in the royal household, Mark Smeaton. Smeaton was not a nobleman, he was not wealthy. He had little protection inside the dangerous world of royal politics. That made him vulnerable, very vulnerable. Soon rumors spread that Smeaton had confessed to a terrible crime. He claimed he had been involved in an affair with the queen. The news shocked the court. Adultery with a queen was not just scandalous, it was treason, but many people doubted the story. Because under the laws of the time, interrogations could be brutal. Prisoners could be pressured, frightened, even tortured until they said what their captors wanted to hear. And Smeaton's confession raised more questions than answers. Still, the accusations did not stop. More men were arrested. Noblemen, courtiers, men who had spoken to Anne, laughed with her, or simply been seen in her presence. Then came the most shocking accusation of all. Anne's own brother was arrested, George Boleyn. George Boleyn was known as an intelligent and charismatic courtier. He had supported his sister for years and played an important role in the king's government. Now he was accused of the unthinkable incest. According to the charges, Anne had betrayed both her husband and her family. The claims were shocking. To many observers, they seemed almost impossible. But the court moved quickly. On May 2, 1536, Anne Boleyn herself was arrested. Without warning, she was taken by boat along the River Thames to the same place where she had once celebrated her coronation, the Tower of London. As she entered the fortress, witnesses later said Anne seemed confused, shocked, almost unable to believe what was happening because she understood something terrible. Once a person entered the tower accused of treason, the chances of leaving alive were very small. The trials began only days later. One by one, the accused men were brought before the court. The verdicts came quickly, guilty. Then it was Anne's turn. The queen stood before a panel of powerful nobles. Some had once served her loyally. Others had long despised her rise to power. The charges were read aloud: adultery, treason, incest. Anne defended herself fiercely. She denied the accusations again and again. But the decision had already been shaped long before the trial began. Within hours, the verdict was announced: guilty. The punishment for treason was death. Anne Boleyn was sentenced to execution. And just like that, the woman who had once reshaped the entire kingdom of England was reduced to a prisoner waiting for the sword. Behind the scenes, the machinery of power had done its work. The king had his freedom. The court had its solution. And Anne Boleyn had only days left to live. But even now, centuries later, historians still ask the same haunting question. Were these crimes real, or had the truth been carefully buried beneath the politics of a king who had already decided his queen's fate? Dawn breaks slowly over the grey stone walls of the Tower of London. The morning is quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seem hesitant to sing, as if the air itself understands that something heavy is about to happen. It is May 19, 1536. Inside the fortress, guards move carefully through narrow corridors. Their footsteps echo softly against ancient stone. No one speaks much. There is a strange stillness in the air. Today a queen will die. In a small chamber Anne Boleyn prepares herself. The night before had been long. Some say she slept very little. Others say she prayed quietly, asking for peace in the final hours of her life. But when the morning finally arrives, witnesses notice something unexpected. Anne is calm. Not the calm of someone who has accepted defeat, but the calm of someone who has already faced the worst fear and somehow moved beyond it. She dresses carefully, a dark gown, a simple cloak, her famous dark hair hidden beneath a white linen cap. There are no jewels today, no crown, no symbols of power. Only a woman walking toward the end of her story. Outside, a small crowd has gathered within the tower grounds. Executions of nobles were not always public events, but enough witnesses stand nearby to observe what will happen. They watch quietly, some with curiosity, some with pity. Some perhaps still believing the terrible accusations that brought Anne here. A wooden scaffold has been built. It stands against the pale morning sky, simple, stark, and impossible to ignore. Anne steps forward. For a moment she looks out at the faces around her. Men in armor, officials of the court, servants, strangers, all watching the fall of a queen, but Anne does something surprising. She smiles gently, then she speaks. Her voice is steady, clear. Careful with every word, she does not accuse anyone, she does not protest her innocence. Instead, she praises the king, Henry VIII. To modern ears, the words may sound strange. But many historians believe Anne understood something important in that moment. Her family still lived in England, and the king still held the power to protect them or destroy them. So Anne chooses grace. She thanks the people who have treated her kindly. She asks those listening to pray for her soul. And then she kneels. Henry had ordered something unusual for this execution. Instead of the traditional axe used in England, he arranged for a skilled swordsman from France. The blade of a sword was faster, cleaner. Perhaps in his own distant way, the king believed he was showing mercy. The executioner stands ready. Anne removes the small cap covering her hair. A lady-in-waiting gently ties a blindfold across her eyes. For a moment, the world becomes silent. Anne kneels upright, her posture calm. Witnesses later say her final words were soft. A simple prayer, "Lord, receive my soul." The swordsman moves quietly into position, and then, in a single swift motion, the sword falls. It is over in an instant. The life of Anne Boleyn, once the most powerful woman in England, ends in a moment of steel and silence. For a brief time, no one moves. The crowd stands still, absorbing what they have just witnessed. Then the officials begin their work. Anne's body is carefully wrapped and carried away. There is no grand funeral, no royal procession. She is buried quietly inside the chapel of the Tower. Just another fallen figure in the long, complicated history of the English crown. But life at court does not pause for long. Within days, the court begins to move forward. And the king does the same. Only 11 days after Anne's execution, Henry VIII marries another woman, Jane Seymour. Where Anne had been bold and outspoken, Jane is gentle and quiet. She carries herself carefully, never challenging the king, never drawing attention in dangerous ways. Many nobles approve of the new queen immediately. They believe stability has finally returned to England. And perhaps they believe Anne Boleyn's story is finished. But history rarely ends where people expect, because Anne left something behind. A child. A little girl who had once disappointed the king simply by being born female. Her name was Elizabeth I. At the time of Anne's death, Elizabeth was only 2 years old. She would grow up without her mother, surrounded by whispers about the scandal that destroyed her family. Many believed she would fade quietly into history, but fate had other plans. Years later, Elizabeth would rise to the throne herself, and she would become one of the most powerful rulers England had ever known. Under her reign, the nation would grow stronger. Art, exploration, and culture would flourish. Her era would become known as the Elizabethan Age. And in a quiet, almost poetic way, the daughter of Anne Boleyn would succeed where so many others had failed. She would rule England not as a shadow of her father, but as a legend in her own right. Still, even after centuries have passed, the mystery surrounding Anne Boleyn's fall remains. Historians continue to debate the evidence. Were the accusations real? Was she truly guilty of the crimes that condemned her? Or was her fate decided long before the trial began? A queen who once changed the religion of an entire kingdom. A woman who captured the heart of a king and then lost it. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere hidden between ambition and fear, between love and power, but one thing is certain.